はい、では時間になりましたので、パネルディスカッションに入っていきたいと思います。今、4人の方が、4人の私含めてですが、講演がありました。で、ちょっと、質問できなかった、ご質問いただいてたんですけれども、お答えいただけなかったものがありますので、先に、そちらについて、質問に答えていただきたいと思います。はい。では、まず、ピーターに対しての質問です。青の大学図書館と赤の大学図書館では、大学の学科構成、例えば理系の学科が多いとか、文系の学科が多いとかありますかという質問です。
Right, okay, thank you for the question. So Blue University Library is very much a multidisciplinary, Blue University is very much a multidisciplinary university, so it covers kind of the full range of academic subjects, including the arts, sciences, humanities, social sciences. And Red University is more renowned for the sciences, I would say.
はい、ありがとうございました。そして、Stephen, you have also question. Any AI tools you recommend about HathiTrust?
All of them? Yeah, we try everything. Students come to us with different ideas. They've learned something in class, or they've seen a paper at a conference, and they try and bring it and say, "Hey, let's try it. Let's try these things." So we tend to use that scikit-learn and notebooks a lot, and whatever plugs into that, we use it quite a bit. Does that answer the question?
Yes. では、続きまして、富浦先生に対するご質問だと思いますが、3つほどありますので、お答えください。まず1つ目ですけれども、データのファイル形式については指定などはありますかという質問です。
指定はありません。タイプを取ってるだけで、文字とか数値データとかそういう種別を書いてもらうだけですね。アンケートではなくて、保存する場合ですか？
だと思います。
保存する場合も別に指定はないと思います。ただ、大規模な画像データとかになりますと、その上限に引っかかってしまう可能性はあります。
はい、ありがとうございました。それからもう2つですが、九州大学のポリシー解説を拝見して2点お伺いしたく存じます。DMP は交付金でも、資金配分期間の求めがなくても作成するのでしょうかというのが1つ目。それから2つ目が、組織の移動後の帰属や管理についてはどのような議論がなされましたか？
はい。まず、DMP に関してですが、現時点では、日本の場合は DMP っていうのはあくまで助成機関が、提出を求めるものです。でも、最終的にはですね、ガバナンスの強化という意味で、大学と、研究者の間で、どういうデータを持ってて、どういうふうに管理しているかという情報交換といいますか、コミュニケーションのために使う道具と考えておりますので、公的資金を受けたものであれば、必ずいずれですね、提出してもらうということになると思います。それから2点目が何でしたかね。
組織の移動後の帰属や管理について。
はい。これは非常に難しい問題で、日本ではですね、まずデータが誰に帰属するかというのが明確な共有されているような認識が はっきりしてない。多分大学も、所有権といいますか、データそのものに所有権というのはないんですけれども、大学も知財として、知財になるか知財になれば大学が知財を持つことになるんですけれども、データの帰属に関しては、おそらく大学もデータを所有権を主張したい。で、研究者本人も一部はやっぱり自分のものだろうという認識はあると思うんですね。なので、それはもう文化によっても違いますので、こうだとは言い切れないでしょうということになりまして、それは部局で、あるいはプロジェクトごとにきちんと必要があれば事前に、で、そうでない場合でも話し合ってちゃんと決めるということにしておりますが、あまり帰属にこだわらずに、研究データがきちんと管理されるということに重きを置いてルールを作ってくださいというふうにしております。はい。以上です。
ありがとうございました。予定してなかった質問なんですけれども、今、そのデータの帰属のお話が出ましたけれども、多分データのオーサーシップとオーナーシップの話というのは、アメリカの大学でも同じような議論があるのかなというふうに思うんですが、それらについてお二人何かコメント等あればお願いしたいと思うんですが、いかがでしょうか。
So, excuse me. Non-exclusive open right. Again, like hearing myself. Non-exclusive open rights is one of the ways. Open licensing is one way to deal with some of this authorship issue. When in one of my Mellon grants, that's literally what it says, that when we accept the money from a private foundation, this is a private foundation, is that we grant the foundation non-exclusive perpetual rights in the data. It's still our data, but the funding agency has that, they can do whatever they want with it. So that kind of thinking, I think, is a way to go. I mean, we still own the data, but the foundation can do what it wants with the data also. I am a big believer in authorship attribution. In the scholarly world, that's how we get paid, right? That's we get promoted, we go to conferences because we write papers and we get credit for our scholarly work. I don't know if you noticed in my slides that we have official DOIs for our data sets, right? We would like people to cite that. This is the data set, and that's how we get recognition. That's how the HathiTrust Research Center gets its recognition for doing its job, and so on. So that's part of any kind of, I believe, data management strategy is to give credit where credit's due, especially to the scholars that created the data, for performance reviews and so on, and findability. It also helps other people find the data when you make reference to it in a paper and so on. Go to this DOI and then here's the data. So yeah, so authorship, I'm a big believer in open license, non-exclusive licensing of the data is a way to make sure it's open and so on. Peter, the other thing I wanted to mention about our data management plans, we've been talking about getting money from funders, and so data management plans needed there. And then, of course, the government wants us to maximize the reuse of our data and the data that they paid for. There's the third party in this that we haven't spoken about much today, are the publishers. The publishers of our scholarly papers are wanting that the data be accessible for reproducibility and verification purposes. I don't know, many conferences now, many journals require that you deposit the data. And the other players in this equation, so you have the publishers, it's also the scholarly societies that typically might control a publication or a conference. They are also very keen on not only open access papers, but open access data as much as possible. So that's all part of this world. I know that at the University of Illinois, our great leader at our research data services, Dr. Heidi Imker, part of her job is actually matchmaking. It's not all about just keeping the data in Illinois. It's finding out, oh, you're a biologist. There's a good data service for biology information over here. I'll help you get that information there. Here's an astronomy service, so we'll help you get astronomy data over here. And that's all part of proper research data management. So does that answer the question? Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And sort of building on that a little bit as well. So talking about, for instance, citing data sets. So another strategy are data journals where people that publish research papers can then also publish data sets, or they publish papers about their data sets in which they present a data set or multiple data sets and talk about the data sets. And that can be very useful, not just for citing, but also for facilitating reuse, because they provide more context about how the data were collected and how to interpret the data, because it's not just about making the data set accessible, but it's also about fostering trust in the data set, so that the reuser can actually trust that the data was collected using appropriate methods, for example. I think the other kind of the flip side as well is also, we're talking about sort of data ownership. Researchers are often very reluctant or anxious about making their data open because they're worried about losing the rights over their data. And so that's something that needs to be balanced, not necessarily publishing data immediately, but maybe having a time period where they can publish, say, a few papers from the same data set and then make the data set available. So, I mentioned in my presentation that I also did research with researchers that study microbes in the seafloor, and the cruises that they go on. It's this big international organization, the International Ocean Discovery Program. Japan is a massive player in the IODP, and the IODP makes rock samples available to scientists, and the IODP says that the researchers have to publish their data sets, but it gives the researchers, I think, a year before they have to publish the data set, so that the researchers can publish articles first. So there is that as well. So that's something else to think about. It's not, in terms of sort of ownership, balancing openness with the researchers who collected the data in the first place.
I'm going to add one more thing about the importance of research data management and data in the new scholarly enterprise. So my first research area as an academic was music information retrieval. And one of the problems that we had is we had no common data sets to work on. Everyone was just collecting a little bit of data off their laptop and running very small experiments. One of the leading researchers in the music information retrieval area actually is from Japan. He's Dr. Mazataka Goto up at Tsukuba and ACE. Am I saying it right? Well, the Science Institute up in Tsukuba. And one of the top cited papers in my discipline is his data set. It became the gold standard data set against which everyone did their work. And it's really important if you look at all the different disciplines, to do compare and contrast studies, you need common data. And all part of this, it's really important that we provide opportunities for common data sets to be available and usable. Even if people are not publishing against a data set, they would like to run their experiments against data for which they know results from other people to see, oh, I guess my algorithm's not so good. I'm not going to publish on it. So it's really important to think of data as this common ground resource across all disciplines. And it's data itself is actually valuable in that sense for scholarship.
日本でもですね、数年のエンバーゴ期間を設けて、その後はオープンにするということは、いくつかの分野ではすでに実施されていますので、おそらくその方向で進んでいくんじゃないかなというふうに思っております。
はい、ありがとうございました。では、いただいておりました質問に関しては、お答えしたと思います。で、ここからはですね、パネルディスカッションの方に入っていきたいと思いますけれども、引き続き参加者の皆さんからも質問を受け付けたいと思います。特定の方に対する質問でも結構ですし、パネリスト全員に対する質問、もしくは、ここで議論してもらいたい内容というのがございましたら、そちらでも結構です。引き続き、ウェビナーの方の、Q&A のところに書いていただいても結構ですし、フロアの方は手を挙げていただいて、ご発言いただければと思います。では、ちょっと質問を待つ間、私の方から、質問をさせていただきたいと思います。事前に用意していた質問2に関することなんですけれども、と言っても、すみません、フロアの方々はわからないと思うんですが、研究データ管理というのは、研究者が責任を持って行うというふうに、考えています。で、アメリカの、お二人の方々のそれぞれの自分たちの、例で結構なんですけれども、研究データ管理を支援する人材に、どのような支援を求めているのかというのをお聞きしたいと思っています。実際に、例えば、さっきハイディ・イムカの話が出ましたけれども、図書館の RDS サービス部門に、相談をしたことがあるのか、もしくは、皆さん、アイスクールにおりますので、自分たちでしっかり研究データ管理できるということなのかもしれませんけれども、そのあたりですね、ご自分の経験で結構ですので、データを使った研究をしている研究者の立場としてですね、こういった支援があった方がいいとか、こういったところには支援が必要だというところがあったら、できるだけその具体的にお答えいただければと思います。
So yeah, there. Yeah, we worked with the library quite a bit with some of the. We worked with the library quite a bit on several things. The one thing that we've worked with them on is data management plans for the grants. And the trick is the library knows about the different agencies in the way that a single researcher might not know about the different agencies. So if we have an agency in the United States that does humanities, it's the National Endowment for the Humanities, its data management plan questions are different than the data management plan questions for the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health or the Defense Army Research Projects Administration, DARPA, if I'm saying it right, all have unique elements in their data management plans. And the questions can be quite daunting, the actual layout of the requirements. Sometimes you don't have to answer all the questions. Like, I don't know right now is sometimes appropriate answer, but it's getting the guidance from people like Heidi and her staff saying, okay, this one works. Here's some examples that we've done in the past that were funded and successful, or we got questions about, and we fixed. So that was very, very much coming from the library. The other aspect that the library definitely helped us with is our work with mathematics librarian Tim Cole, who's a metadata expert, how to get our DOIs, the DOIs and things like that. We also have an information repository where we put some small things rather than big data. We put smaller things in our information repository, and then that creates a metadata record for use and gets access. The other side of it too, that in consultation, the reason that we picked JSON as one of our formats was in consultation with the library staff about what format might be the best one for uptake. And, you know, making sure that you can do it, and documenting things is better. We create documentation pages for our data sets. So each one of our data sets comes with a wiki page about what each field stands for, how it was generated, what tool was used to generate it. And that's all inspired by our interactions with the library. And yeah, I think that's the other service that is kind of tricky. That's always, we want our data to get used, and finding places to put the data that have useful interfaces, not for us as the researchers, but for other people to come get our data is always a challenge. So we're always trying to get what I call forward-facing storage, so that I can create a URL and I can go to my conferences and say, hey, here, go to this URL and get my data. Here, take it, please. So that sort of publication aspect of getting the data out there and used. So yes, that's the answer to my question, or your question, my answer.
Well, for my own research, not really. It's a bit embarrassing to admit, but you know, my data is just interview recordings, interview transcripts, and you know, my field notes and documents. So the data management challenges are minimal, and yeah, the interview, as I've already said, they can't be released publicly for confidentiality reasons. So there's not much, but the scientists that I've studied, they do sometimes use library services. I've already talked about the astronomers, but the subsea floor, the seafloor microbe researchers, they sometimes use, for instance, the institutional repository. So that, you know, they're required to upload data sets that they produce. Sometimes the preference is for them to upload their data sets to repositories, disciplinary repositories. So there are repositories, for instance, for like the DNA sequences of microbes that are quite well established. But for data sets that are kind of unique, that don't really follow an established standard, the institutional repository can be useful for them. So that's pretty much it.
はい、ありがとうございました。私の方でもうちょっと聞きたいことがありますので、ちょっとご質問いただいてますが、それは後にして私の方の質問を先にさせていただきたいと思います。今、図書館とその RDS に一貫してのサービスを、があるといいというお話でしたけれども、今回、あまりご紹介はしませんでしたけれども、日本にはそのサブジェクトライブラリアンが、おりません。で、 そういう意味では、その固有の分野に対応した、充実した研究データ管理というのをするのが、難しいんではないか。もしくは、図書館の人たちも皆さん、その心配をしているというか、我々が、その、十分なサービス、支援ができるのかというところがあるんですけれども、今、の実例のお話を聞くと、それほどその分野の、特有の事情を知らなくても、可能なサービスなのかなと思ったりもするんですけれども、そのあたりですね、すべての分野というわけではないんでしょうけれども、その分野特有の事情が必要な、研究データ管理の話と、それから、汎用性のあるといいますか、分野に依存しない形の、支援というのでは、どのあたりがあるのかっていうのに、もしご見解があればお聞かせいただきたいと思います。
Yeah, so I think firstly, being a good service of kind of knowing where to point people, knowing where to direct people if they need help. You know, if a researcher comes to you as a librarian and you don't know yourself how to help them, but you do know who they can go to, that can be very useful. So for instance, the Digital Curation Centre that's based in Edinburgh in the UK has a lot of resources for research data curation. So being able to point being able to point researchers in that direction could be very useful. I also think another thing that's very important is communication with the researchers about what they can and can't expect. This was certainly a big issue in the example of the astronomers. So there was one, so actually Blue University Library took on the task of what was known as the help desk. And the help desk was designed to be a service where astronomers would come to the help desk if they had queries about the data set. The Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders expected the help desk staff to be experts in astronomy and to be able to answer the questions of the astronomers. But the Blue University Library actually set the help desk up as a triage service. So it was much more sort of, it was a non-expert service. It was more about directing people. And there was, and that was actually where the Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders felt quite frustrated because there hadn't been the communication about what to expect, you know, that the service would be. So I think just being very good with communication about what researchers can and cannot expect from a research data service is very important in that respect. Managing their expectations.
I'm sort of making this up to a certain extent. So I kind of believe in subject specialization. I think there is always a role for it. And I realize that's not how things work in library science here in Japan. So I think learning by doing is going to be the word of the day, words of the day, plural. I really liked the comment you made earlier, Emmy, about building the network of our research data managers. And I think what could be happening and what should happen is that the folks that join your program or that the nascent research data management world here in Japan, they will start to specialize because they already have some knowledge, or they're working at an institution that's more astronomy research going on, or they're working at an institution that's more hydrogen engineering, for example, or digital humanities and so on. And then by building out the network of professionals, they can support each other, right? Saying, I'm working on a digital humanities project. Can you help me out? Or I will connect you to the person that's more expert. Yeah, so I think part of it is learning by doing. You're going to, if you start with if you're part of the process starting at the data management plan, then you're in the life cycle of the projects, right? So you learned at the beginning what the project's about, what it's trying to accomplish, then you can start being in a position as the research data manager to get those pieces together. There's another piece of research data management that we haven't really discussed, but is also comes, I guess, with experience and consultation with the researchers, is what is the data and what is not. There will be a definitive data set that always seems to be associated with a paper, but there's lots of other stuff, that preliminary experiments, notes, all that other stuff, sort of your administrative, along the lines of the administrative thing that Peter was mentioning with his red and blue universities. So I think there's part of the education, part of figuring out what it is to provide these data services, to figure out what to do or strategize what to do with that stuff too. That's a harder question, actually.
ありがとうございました。今のお二人のコメント、すごく我々になんか心強いと言いますか、はい、元気が出る、お話だったと思います。ありがとうございました。では、ちょっと質問いただいておりますので、そちらの方に、にお答えいただきたいと思います。これは多分富浦先生に向けてのご質問だと思いますが、富浦先生ご覧になってますでしょうか。一応読み上げます。九州大学独自の研究者向けストレージの件、興味深く拝見しました。小規模大学で同様の取り組みをするのは困難かと思いますが、今後このような環境整備を進めていくべきなのでしょうかというご質問です。
はい。我々の場合はですね、概算要求をしまして、それの補正予算で、ついてきたお金、予算を使いまして、導入しました。で、結構な額の、システムになりますので、旧大としてもですね、これを定期的に維持できるかというのは大きな問題です。特に長期保存に対応しようとしますと、ストレージシステム自体が途中でダメになりますので、マイグレーションとかして新しいシステムに乗り換えないといけなくなるわけですが、その時の予算をどういうふうに確保するのかっていうのは非常に大きな問題で、あります。で、一番いい解決策は、国がオープンサイエンスを推進するというのであれば、国の予算で、大学とか国立の研究所等が共有できるようなストレージシステムを提供してくれるというのが一番ありがたいですけれども、なかなか難しいとは思います。かといってですね、受益者負担という考え方もあるんですが、これもなかなか難しいですね。特に公開の場合のストレージをどう用意するかというときに、公開する人は受益者とは言い難い。使う方が受益者になるわけですから、誰からお金を徴収するかというのが難しいです。それから長期保存の場合にもやはり難しくて、助成金を受けている間は、その助成金の例えば間接経費とかで払えばいいわけですけれども、研究が終わった後に長期保存しないといけないわけで、その予算をどこから出すかというのは受益者負担の考え方から少し外れてると思われるわけですね。なので、すみません、答えはないんですが、非常に難しい問題で国が本格的に対応してくれないと困るというものになると思います。それから海外の例、オーストラリアの例でしたかね、メルボルンでしたか、そこは大きな大学ですけれども、データを公開すると、それによって企業とかが利用して、それに対する、助成金ではないんですが、ファンドを作って資金提供してくれるとかいうような動きもあったと思いますので、そういうことも考えていく必要があるのかもしれないです。よろしいですかね。
はい、ありがとうございました。
I have no idea what the actual state of the art is in Japan right now, but one thing that I find very successful in the United States are library consortia where libraries with common problems come together to create a service. That's the Hadi Trust. They came together to create the service, and it's subscription to the library. So the libraries pay into the Hadi Trust in proportion to the number of books that they have in the service, and the University of Michigan takes care of it, and it's there, right? So even small universities can be a member of the Hadi Trust. So I'm wondering whether there's a possible grant or a future in creating a research data management consortium so that your smaller colleagues from the smaller universities could pay a small subscription fee. It's the university libraries paying the subscription fee to a larger unit that would take care of the infrastructure and that, and based on how many projects have data deposited in your research data management system, so that infrastructure overhead is sits at the bigger universities, sits at your Kyushus, your Tokyos, or your Kyotos, and that way every university has a research data management service. It's just that the infrastructure sits someplace with bigger infrastructure. So consortia, I'm a real big fan of consortia.
はい、ありがとうございました。では、もう一つ質問いただいております。先ほどもデータの再利用であるとか、それからデータディスカバリーのお話がありましたけれども、ご質問いただいている内容は、研究データの検索に関する網羅的、横断的システムの整備が日本での今後の大きな課題の一つになるかと思います。この点についてご意見いただければありがたいです。ということで、例としては、サイニーリサーチという日本語の学術情報データベースがあるんですが、研究データの欄が設けられていますけれども、古典的画像データについては、サイニー画面上では詳細メタデータが示されず、リンク先の国書データベース等に進む必要があるということで、うまくリンクされているわけではないという現状があります。どなたか、富浦先生からいきますか。
はい。古典籍の方が、メタデータがどういうふうになっているかというのはよく存じ上げないんですけれども、サイニーリサーチ、学に RDM とも連携しておりまして、メタデータを収集して、検索に使えるようにするというのが、もともとの、NIA の発想でしょうから、現状ではまだうまくいってないかもしれませんが、将来的には研究データの、検索に関してもメタデータが充実していけばですね、かなりいけるのではないかなというふうに思います。ただ現状で日本の研究データはほとんどうまく見つからないですね。それから海外のデータであっても、例えば Google の、データセットサーチ、それからスコーパス等で使えるものも含めてですね、なかなかうまく、検索するというのは、メタデータが充実してないということが原因だろうとは思いますが、なかなかうまく探せないというのが現状です。で、ここはなんとか、図書館情報学の研究者も含めてですね、メタデータだけには頼らない別の方法等も考えていく必要があるのかなと思います。以上です。
ありがとうございます。Do you have any comments?
I feel a new grant opportunity, research project on this. It's an open question, and it's our job to fix it. So, yes, it is very hard. It's hard to find these things. Within disciplines, I think it's easier. It's crossing disciplines. So the service at Michigan, the IC, I always get it wrong.
Yes,
that one, right? I mean that is used. That's known in the social science community, and that's a place where people go a lot
What is the service?
Yeah, it's,
the ICPSR.
can someone Google it, make sure I get it correct? Yeah, yeah.
ICPSR, it's the
It's for social science data.
Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, I
Right.
think.
And note the word consortium.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And people go, they start there, right? To find the kinds of data sets. And though people that do this kind of research, it's in their discipline that they put their data there because that's where all their colleagues go to look for data. And so it's a nice reinforcing, self-reinforcing practice. So encouraging that across the disciplines helps. And why it also works is that social scientists and political scientists use certain terms. They understand the terminology in a way that I, as a music researcher or a digital humanities person, might not. And that's another reason why global data search is hard. It's the different disciplinary languages that are spoken and the descriptions of the data that don't translate very well across disciplines.
Yeah, certainly at the interface between different disciplines, there are a lot of challenges. I mean, sometimes even the language is the same, but the meaning is different. Different disciplines can't even agree on what they mean by the word data. Sometimes they will disagree on that, but they also have different standards. It's not just a question of sort of finding the data, but also, they have different understandings of what constitutes quality, what data is good enough to use, what is appropriate, what is considered trustworthy data. They'll have different ways of evaluating that as well. So, I think that's why it's very important, to actually really sort of understand what researchers want, and sort of do things like studies of users, studies of researchers, to really kind of understand what they mean in their particular context.
ありがとうございました。あと2分ぐらいしか時間ないんですけれども、富浦先生、何かこの場でお聞きしたいこととかございますか？特にないです。わかりました。そうしましたらですね、せっかくお二人イリノイから来ていただきましたので、ぜひこの日本の状況についても新しく知ったこともあるかと思いますんで、短くちょっと皆さんにですねメッセージ等ありましたらお願いしたいなと思うんですが。
Keep up the good work. No, I really it's very exciting to see the work that's going on in the research data space here at Kyushu and great leadership. And of course in Japan. I think it's very exciting to see how thoughtful all this, how you're approaching it so thoughtfully. And adapting it to the uniqueness of the Japanese research world, because one size does not fit all. We all live in different cultures. So as I said, keep up the good work, and everyone is invited to come to Illinois and visit. If you ever want to talk more about things, research data, we have colleagues that do specialize in data curation and data cleaning. We haven't talked much about data cleaning. That speaks to what Peter was saying about norms of data transformations and so on. It's a big area. It really is. But yeah, I just want to thank everyone for being so attentive over the last 4 hours. It's a rather warm room in a warm day. And and thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo Professor Downie's thanks. It's been really wonderful to be here, and I had a great time. Yeah, it's really exciting to see the development of the research data management program and services and curriculum. Perhaps, yeah, also something that's very striking to me. Working in the US, coming from the UK, being in Japan, is that at the moment, it seems it's not just about disciplines, but it seems that researchers are very much working in their national contexts. Like their governments have a policy, their national funding agencies implement the policy, and then the researchers have to follow their national government's policies. And I mean, that's good. It's making progress in terms of research data management and making data more open. But at the same time, there's also a risk that it means that the data just stops at the borders, that maybe if they're not being curated in the same way globally, but a lot of the, science and the phenomena that we study, that scientists study, they don't stop at borders. And so I think, maybe the next stage is to think about how we can really realize globally open data and make sure that actually those benefits are fully realized. And that's, I think, a really interesting challenge moving forward. But thank you very much for listening today. I really appreciate your attention, and thank you for being here. And thanks for inviting us. It's been great.
ありがとうございました。研究データ管理というのは、日本では、よく私使いますけれども、誰が渦中の栗を拾うかというような状態で、誰がやるのか、誰がリーダーシップを取るのかというようなところが、話題になっているわけですが、ちょっと今、部門長である富浦先生の前でも言うのはなんですが、九州大学は多分そういう意味では、我々が栗を拾わなければいけないということになったんだと思います。で、そういう意味ではもう覚悟を決めてやっていくしかないのかなというふうには思っていますが、これ我々だけではなくて、いろんな大学が必要なことをやっていかなくては、それは程度の差はあるかと思いますけれども、やっていかなきゃいけないことだと思いますので、どうせやるんでしたら皆さんと協力しながら、また我々がリードできるところはしていきながらですね、今後もやっていきたいなというふうに、さっきスティーブンが言いましたように、頑張ってやるというようなことを続けていきたいというふうに思っています。今後もこのような形でいろんな皆さんとですね一緒にディスカッションできる情報共有できる機会を設けたいというふうに思っております。一旦ですねここでパネルの方は時間となりましたので終わりにさせていただきたいと思います。3名の方々どうもありがとうございました。